welcome to episode number 84 of the Cheesesteaks and Controllers podcast, presented by Fox PHL The Gambler, 102.5 FM, 1480 AM, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music. I am Jason Finelli, the esports and gaming insider for Fox PHL The Gambler, back. I almost said the gander. See, I'm just coming back from vacation, folks. It's back from my Mickey Mouse capade last week down in Disney World with the family. Had a blast. Kids loved it. Parents loved it. Grandparents loved it. But I am back here now to give you all of the latest gaming and esports news, starting with the Overwatch League actually announcing that they wanted to have a season this year and when we can start watching it. That's very exciting. I'll have all the details on that. Get into the whole merger and acquisition thing after Microsoft bought Activision, Sony bought Bungie, a couple other little ones here and there. So I'm going to give some ideas as to what might happen next. And finally, we're going to talk about Horizon Forbidden West. I reviewed the game for MMORPG. It launches today. If you're listening when this podcast came out on Friday, if you're listening on the radio, it came out yesterday. And I will be getting into the nitty-gritty of why I love this game so much, without spoilers, of course. I'm not going to do that to anybody. But before we do any of that, let's get into, as usual, the 6 in 60 seconds. 6 teams remain in the Rainbow Six Siege 6 Invitational 2022, including 2 North American teams, Team Solo Mid, and Philadelphia's own Sonics. Cloud9 wins the Halo Championship Series Anaheim Major, defeating Optic Gaming in the finals, with E United and Sentinels rounding out the top 4. Nerd Street has announced a partnership with cryptocurrency exchange FTX US, who will sponsor the Nerd Street Summer Championships. Meanwhile, Cyberpunk 2077's new gen update is now live for PS5 and Xbox Series X, including AI and driving overhauls, new weapons, better crowds, and more. Fortnite has added gyro aiming and flick stick controls for a bit of motion control into all modes of the game. And finally, Capcom is teasing something with a new countdown that lines up with the end of this weekend's Capcom Cup. Those are your 6 in 60 seconds. And the 6 in 60 seconds are brought to you today by the sponsor for Cheesesteaks and Controllers, Ghost Shaver. The Ghost Shaver is designed to be an extension of your arm, allowing the user to reach anywhere on the head, face, or body. The precision cutting system is buffered by 5 rotary flex action super thin blades and a patented handle design that fits into the palm of your hand precisely. Go to ghostshaver.com or Amazon to check things out and get yours. That's Ghost Shaver, a shave above the rest. Yes, those are your 6 in 60 seconds. Let me just take a second to give all of the praise in the world to Sonics out there playing in the 6 Invitational right now. They are in the final 6. They are in the losers bracket as you're listening to this right now when it goes live at 9 a.m. on Friday morning. Their match is at 1 p.m. Eastern on the YouTube Rainbow Six Esports, which is youtube.com/rainbow_6_esports or twitch.tv/rainbow_6. They are facing FaZe Clan, which is a Brazilian team in this particular league. They field a team of Brazilian players. In that lower bracket, if they move on, they will face the winner of Team Liquid and MIBR. And if they win that, then they have to play the loser of the winners final, which is currently Team Empire, who sent Sonics to losers bracket, and Team Solo Mid, the other North American team still alive. And if they win that one, they're in the grand final. So they still have some work to do. They have at least 4 matches ahead of them in order to get to those finals. But the fact they're still there, still holding strong, and still representing North America, and by proxy, the city of Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania, absolutely love it. Good luck to you out there, Sonics. We are rooting for you here to win the 6th Invitational and bring home that hammer. I would love to see that hammer in the block in your new headquarters to kick things off with your partnership there. But let's not talk about that anymore. They're still playing. They are getting ready for that next match Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Let's talk about a league a little bit more into the future and get into all the details for the 2022 Overwatch League season. Yes, folks, it is almost time to get back into the Overwatch trenches. 2022 Overwatch League season finally had details revealed by the league itself this week, We now know what the regions will look like. We know how many matches each teams will play. We know what the start date is, and we know the first week of matches. So I have everything right here in front of me, and I will be going over the information here. So this is on the Overwatch League official website. I'm basically just reading it as it's written here, as clear as it can go, and I'll get into each bullet point as we go forward. So the first thing is that the schedule kicks off on May the 5th with 4 days of matches, Thursday, Friday, and 3 days of matches. 4 days, sorry. Looking at these graphics wrong. It is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Thursday being Western Conference, Friday being both, Saturday being both, and Sunday being both. Thursday night, have a couple of primetime matches, 3 p.m. Eastern, 4:30, and 6 p.m. Eastern on that May 5th. And then Friday, the times are absolutely everywhere based on the region that you are in. So let's get a little more into what's going on here. The league will remain split into 2 regions, East and West. The East will feature 7 teams, 1 less than last year, and the West region will feature 13 teams, 1 more than last year. Now, I'm going to read these teams off. There's only one difference between this year and last year, which I will say once I get through the list. So the Eastern region is Chengdu Hunters, Guangzhou Charge, Hangzhou Spark, Los Angeles Valiant, your Philadelphia Fusion, Seoul Dynasty, and the Shanghai Dragons. The Western region is the Atlanta Reign, the Boston Uprising, the Dallas Fuel, the Florida Mayhem, Houston Outlaws, London Spitfire, LA Gladiators, New York Excelsior, Paris Eternal, San Francisco Shock, Toronto Defiant, Vancouver Titans, and Washington Justice. So the only change in the regions this year is that the New York Excelsior have come back to the Western side. They were on the East last year. They are back in the West this year, leaving 7 teams in the East to compete. 1 less team we have to worry about to qualify at the end of the year. I'll take it. Each team will play a minimum of 24 regular season matches, including 6 seeding matches per tournament cycle. So they are doing the same in-season tournament structure that they had done before. Now they are adding 1 extra day and 1 extra week to each cycle to give teams more of a chance to prove themselves and to go for that balanced strength of schedule that is so hard to do. Because of the different amount of teams in each region, they will be doing different. The 2 regions will be structured differently in each tournament. So the East will play a full round robin during each tournament cycle, where each team plays every other team once, so 6 matches total. And then the West, each team will face off twice against every other opponent over the course of the season. So where the Eastern teams will play each other 4 times throughout the 4 different cycles, the Western teams will only play every other team twice. So that's where that happened. That's how that comes to fruition there. Makes sense. It's a good way to get the teams to see each other outside of just the normal, division structure or whatever they were doing before. It gives every team the chance to play every other team at least twice. And in the East, they can get really familiar with each other, making those Eastern playoffs at the end of the year that much more interesting. Full schedule is not out yet, but as I said, the first week of the Overwatch League has been listed here. And I will get into those matches now. So on Thursday, May the 5th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, first match of the year is LA Gladiators versus those New York Excelsior, back in the Western Conference this year, followed by Paris Eternal and San Francisco Shock at 4:30 Eastern, and 6 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, Atlanta versus Florida. Friday, May the 7th, early in the morning, May the 6th, we're talking about 2 a.m. Pacific, so 5 a.m. Eastern Time. Your Philadelphia Fusion play their first match of the year against the defending champion Shanghai Dragons. What a great first draw for your Fusion. Chengdu gets Guangzhou at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Friday, and then we go through the day and we get into the afternoon matchups. 3 p.m. Eastern, Vancouver and Boston. 4:30 p.m. Eastern, San Francisco and London. 6 p.m. Eastern, Houston and Dallas. Moving to Saturday now. Saturday we'll have the Chengdu Hunters and the Shanghai Dragons at 5 a.m. Eastern Time. Seoul and Philadelphia at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And the LA Valiant and the Hangzhou Spark make their debuts against one another at 8 a.m. Eastern Time Saturday morning. Then we move on to Saturday afternoon. Washington debuts against Toronto at 3 p.m. Eastern. New York takes on Atlanta at 4:30. And the LA Gladiators versus Boston at 6. Finally, Sunday, May the 8th, we have Guangzhou versus the LA Valiant at 5 a.m. Eastern Time. Hangzhou versus Seoul at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And then in the afternoon, Florida versus Paris at Vancouver versus London at 3 p.m. Florida versus Paris at 4:30. Dallas versus Washington at 6 p.m. And then the Sunday primetime spot, 7:30 Eastern Time on May the 8th, Houston takes on Toronto. That is your first week of games for the Overwatch League this year. So now we're going to get into the tournament information, how this is going to work. The first and third tournaments of the season will be regional only, and the format will be expanded to feature more teams from each competition. So 4 teams will qualify in the East region tournaments, 8 teams in the West. Conditions permitting, the second and fourth tournaments of the year are planned to be global live events. That's a beautiful thing. To do this, we're introducing a brand new mid-season event, the Mid-Season Madness Global Tournament, in addition to the postseason tournament. Mid-Season Madness will feature 12 teams, 4 from the East, 8 from the West, competing in a double elimination bracket over 6 days. The mid and postseason tournaments will feature a hefty prize pool of at least $1 million, and the final tournament of the season, the Countdown Cup, will serve as the play-ins for the postseason, and we'll get more details on that, including potential live events being hosted, which would be wonderful, at a later date. And then we will talk about the points and playoff qualifications. So after reviewing this over the off season, the Overwatch League has come to the determination that this is how league points will work in 2022. Every qualifier match they win, they'll get 1 point. That's easy enough. Every team that qualifies for a regional tournament will receive an extra point, regardless of how many wins they had during said tournament. So even if you make the tournament, you get a point. That makes sense. Second place in each regional tournament will receive 2 total league points, while the champions will receive 3. So, for example, in the Eastern Conference, the first regional tournament, every team that makes it gets 1 point. The 2 teams that win in the semifinals and get to the finals will get at least 2, with the winner getting an extra 1. The Mid-Season Madness Global Tournament will offer a heftier reward. Third place team will receive 2, second place will receive 3, and the champions 4 total league points. And everyone who qualifies for mid-season will receive 1 point as well. At the end of the regular season, based on those points, the top 6 seeds from the West will automatically qualify for the playoffs, as will the top 3 from the East. The Countdown Cup play-ins will determine the final 3 teams, 2 from the West and 1 from the East, and those postseason details will be shared at a later date. This makes a lot of sense. There are more ways for more teams to get points. Success is rewarded, even if that success does not follow you into the regional tournament. That'll bode well for your Fusion. They'll get an extra point just for getting there, as they like to qualify for tournaments but not actually win in any of them. Sorry, guys, it's the truth. There's also the glowing specter that this is being played in Overwatch 2. It's 5v5 now, not 6v6. You lose a tank in your structure, so the strategies will be different. The comps will be different. Everything about this tournament will be different. So I say that Shanghai is our first draw, the defending champs, and Seoul, the team that knocked us out of the tournament last year, right after that. But it's a completely different game. We don't know if the teams that played 6v6 can play well in 5v5. Shanghai won the tournament last year. It could mean nothing this year. We won't know until we play it. Now, the Fusion are in a weakened spot as well, because we are probably still reeling from the sudden passing of Alarm, our dynamic 20-year-old player, Rookie of the Year in 2020, and was set to have a very, very, very major career before his life was tragically cut short over the offseason. But it's not to say I can't really gauge where this team is until I see them play, especially in this brand new game, which I'm also not very familiar with. I know obviously most of the modes are the same. I've seen a couple matches of Push, which is the big new mode which will feature in this league this year. So there are a lot of unknowns. It's almost like it's one of those things that esports can do that regular sports cannot do without dire circumstances, and that is press in the big old reset button on your league. After 4 years of Overwatch League action, year 5 is in a brand new game and a brand new format, both league-wise and game-wise, in the 5v5. So this really could be up in the air. You could see a team like Boston, who took forever to finally get hot in last year's season, dominate the entire year. You could see perennial powerhouses like Shanghai and San Francisco fall by the wayside. And that's not to mention how different the rosters are. If you look at the offseason tracker, a team like Seoul was decimated over the offseason, lost almost every player they had to either retirement or went to a different team or what have you. Meanwhile, Shanghai, the champions, they lost 2 players. None of them they lost the one good player on the Develop. They did lose Develop, but that's it. They lost Develop and Molly. They still have Fleta. They still have Void. They still should be very good, assuming that their comps and their chemistry are as good in 5v5 as they are in 6v6. Just a matter of time, just a matter of figuring out what this league's going to look like. But I have to say, I'm very excited. I am more excited for this league than I have been in previous years because there's so much unknown. You don't know what the meta looks like. You don't even know what the game looks like because we've only seen very few previews as of now. Using the league as a vehicle to advertise the new game is slightly underhanded. It's an interesting marketing tactic, but it's also brilliant in its own way. And I'm happy to watch a league played in a game where everybody's on level footing. How many times can you say that about a game or a sport that you watch where everybody watching and playing are on a similar footing because the game is so new and we don't know who's developing and we don't know who's going to be good and who's going to be bad. And we won't know until we start seeing some matches played. I, for one, am all about that. I'm very excited about that possibility, and I am looking forward to some great Overwatch League action starting, finally, on May the 5th. Bring it on, Overwatch League. Bring it on. Coming up in the next segment, we're going to talk about mergers and acquisitions, 5 situations that I think could make a lot of sense in the world of video game companies buying other video game companies. And then we're going to wrap things up in this episode with a nice spoiler-free talk about Horizon Forbidden West. Stick around. All right, welcome back to Cheesesteaks and Controllers, episode number 84 here, hosted by Fox PHL The Gambler, 102.5 FM, 1480 AM, and iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, if you're listening on Spotify, if you're listening on Amazon Music, if you're listening on iHeartRadio, or if you're listening to the live broadcast in the city of Philadelphia on Saturday at 4 p.m., if this voice is hitting your ears, I thank you. I thank you for sticking with me. I thank you for listening, and I hope that I can entertain you with some great information about the world of esports and video games. Now, though, we're not going to get into things we already know. We're going to get into some prognostication, prediction time, things that the world of video games and the internet as a whole really love to do, make up situations that may not actually happen. And today's topic for our prognostication station is going to be mergers and acquisitions, something that has taken the video game industry by storm in the early month of 2022. We're still reeling from Microsoft buying Bethesda and that finalizing in the second half of 2021. And then all of a sudden, we're looking at Microsoft making a splash again by adding Activision Blizzard to its portfolio and everything that entails. I went over that a couple episodes ago. I believe it was episode 82 or 81 when that happened. We talked about that. It was 81. Spent 2 segments on it, to be honest. So go back and listen to that if you want a little more information on that as it happened that week. But now, since then, Sony bought Bungie. Sony now owns the developer behind Destiny 2, who's about to launch their next great expansion next week in The Witch King. 2K bought Zynga, the mobile developer, who has made a lot of different mobile games. That was a big one for them, getting into the mobile game, which is becoming one of the most interesting frontiers in the gaming industry at the moment, but that's another conversation for another day. And things have slowed since then, but their next one is always around the corner. Just today, on Thursday, the 17th, on Ubisoft's earnings call for 2021, a company who has a history of independence, once holding off a hostile takeover by Vivendi, who wanted to bring them in permanently and staying independent and fighting for their independence, said today that they're not looking to sell, but they will hear offers. And when a company as independent as Ubisoft is listening to offers, you know that M&A, mergers and acquisitions, are running rampant in the video game industry. So, let's talk about 5 possibilities here that I think would make sense in the world of M&A. 5 gaming mergers that I think make the most sense and why I think they make the most sense. And the first one is a no-brainer. First one is one that it's a company whose games many people associate with their systems and have for a very, very long time. And that would be Capcom being purchased by PlayStation. It makes a lot of sense. It makes more sense to me than other companies being purchased by PlayStation, if I'm being honest. If I say Street Fighter, if I say Resident Evil, if I say Devil May Cry, if I say... I said Street Fighter already. Even Marvel vs. Capcom, if you want to get into the older stuff. All of Capcom's major... Monster Hunter, there's the other one. All of Capcom's major franchises are associated by most folks with the PlayStation, or to the PlayStation. There are some exceptions, like Monster Hunter does have Rise, and will soon have Rise Sunbreak on the Switch, but it's also on the PC, so PlayStation console exclusivity plus the PC ports would fit into PlayStation's portfolio as well. But Street Fighter V, PlayStation exclusive. PlayStation now owns EVO, one of the biggest fighting game tournaments in the world. So having Capcom under their portfolio as well, who has always been tied to EVO. Street Fighter was the anchor of EVO forever. So having both of those under one roof makes a ton of sense. I just think of if PlayStation was going to make a splash, the Bungie was a decent splash, but if they were going to make one more, and they were going to really try and solidify their foothold and try to match wits with Microsoft and their money-happy ways, I think Capcom is a viable and not necessarily expensive, comparatively, investment. I feel like that it makes the most sense. It's a no-brainer. Looking at the list of companies who are available and who are around, there are a few other names that would make sense under Sony's wing. Square Enix is one of them. We'll get to them in a minute. We'll get to them later in the list. But I think Capcom to PlayStation, if it were to happen, would be like, oh, that makes sense. That was just a matter of time, as opposed to a out-of-left-field shock like Microsoft and Activision Blizzard was. The second one is Ubisoft, who we talked about earlier, and I'm mentioning them because of their 180 on their what we thought was their position on being sold, as I mentioned earlier. And this one, I had a trouble finding a suitor for Ubisoft. Microsoft would make sense, but I have them later in the list. PlayStation kind of makes sense too, but I personally, and maybe this is just my bias, I associate Ubisoft games with Microsoft. Always have. Started with Assassin's Creed. It's been that way ever since. Played Legion, played Watch Dogs on it, played Far Cry's on it. That's just where that happens for me. So that kind of would be, I would lean towards Microsoft there. But honestly, I think there's a company that is bigger. I think there's a company that would have just as much access to just as much capital as Microsoft would. And more importantly, for this group, this company is also European, and that is the Embracer Group. Now, if you don't know who the Embracer Group is, Embracer Group used to be called Nordic Games, or THQ Nordic more recently. They are a European company based in Stockholm, Sweden, who in recent years have gone on an absolute buying spree. Buying up studio after studio after studio, names that you have heard of, under many of their parent groups. So, just for example, they control THQ Nordic. They control Koch Media, who is Deep Silver and others, Vertigo Games and other ones. They control Saber Interactive. They control Gearbox Entertainment. And the list goes on and on. And under those, they control Perfect World Entertainment, one of their more recent acquisitions in December 2021. They control 3D Realms, one of the classic developers. Prime Matter, which is a brand new label they've created with a whole host of games underneath that. Deep Silver, as I mentioned earlier. Gearbox, as I mentioned earlier. Zen Studios, who make Zen Pinball. The list goes on and on. 4A Games, who make the Metro Studios, the Metro games. These people own a lot of studios, and they have the capital, and they have the ability. Bringing Ubisoft into this portfolio as its own parent company under the Embracer Group, to me, makes the most sense. Now, do I think Ubisoft's going to get sold anytime soon? No. I feel like they're going to be independent for a long time, and they just kind of threw that line out there earlier to get people's feathers ruffling and to get schlubs on their podcasts talking about it. Bait taken, Ubisoft. Yum, yum. But I don't actually think they're going to get sold anytime soon, and I look forward to being wrong next week when they announce that they're acquired by, I don't know, Tencent. But I think Embracer Group makes the most sense in this particular situation. So if Ubisoft, I had to pick somewhere Ubisoft would go, it would be to the Embracer Group. Our next one is an interesting one because this name has been floated around for purchase for quite some time now. A lot of lucrative franchises under its belt. One of them about to lose its exclusivity, but still good for at least a little while. And that's Electronic Arts, EA. EA Sports, it's in the game. That's Madden, that's FIFA, that's NHL, plus all of their other franchises like The Sims, which is still a huge moneymaker, believe it or not. They have some Star Wars games under their wings, and the list goes on and on for EA. If I'm looking at EA, this is where I think Microsoft would open up the pocketbook again. Could you imagine a Microsoft with Bethesda, Activision Blizzard, and Electronic Arts under its portfolio? Microsoft could hold its own E3. I mean, they do. It's called Xbox Fan Fest. But now it could be as big as E3 at this rate if they were to get EA as well. This is one, again, I'm also not one I'm very confident in. I don't think EA is going to have a buyer for a long time. And again, if they do, it's going to be a stupid amount of money, up there with the $68.7 billion that Microsoft spent to buy Activision. But I wouldn't see EA fitting in anywhere else. It's that Western bias, I think, that makes me think that if EA is going to go anywhere, they're going to go to Microsoft. Now, Embracer is another candidate here because EA has a strong foothold in Europe with DICE, also in Stockholm and things like that. But I just think that with EA's main offices, main everything here in America, that a Western suitor would make the most sense, and Microsoft would be that Western suitor. Tencent could float in and say, yo, you're ours now, here's a bunch of money. That Tencent is very unpredictable. But I think Embracer, or Microsoft, would be the ones to buy Electronic Arts, if anyone was going to, just based on that. So EA going to Microsoft in this hypothetical sales situation, consolidation of the industry, that is both good for a few and probably bad for the rest of us. But it is neither here nor there. The next one is a little bit off the beaten path, and this one I think it's one of those ones that might be overdue, where they have, these two have a lot of connective tissue now, and I feel like the more they partner, the more one becoming part of the other is just inevitable at this point, even if the company I'm going to mention has mentioned that they are not looking to buy studios. And that is Niantic Entertainment, who are the creators of Pokemon Go, Pikmin Bloom, and more, going to Nintendo. Or if I were going to prevent these on this, the Pokemon Company. I think Nintendo would make more sense. There's more money there, I think. Or maybe a partnership deal where it's co-owned by the two of them. But Niantic has made its chops on Pokemon Go. The game is 5 years old and still going on 6 years old and still as strong as it's ever been. Still has millions of players dishing out billions of dollars per month. And if Nintendo doesn't see that as a cash cow now, I don't think they ever will. Pikmin Bloom, also good, but not quite up to the same standard. Nintendo's internal mobile games aren't quite where they would want them to be. Fire Emblem Heroes is okay, but Miitomo is, nobody plays that anymore. Animal Crossing Pocket Camp is probably not being, I don't think it's being played as much either. So bringing in Niantic and their mobile expertise, especially with their AR, would make a lot of sense. An Animal Crossing AR game, I feel like, is overdue at this point. If I can walk through my neighborhood and plant flowers with Pikmin, why can't I walk through my neighborhood as if it were an Animal Crossing village, meet up with villagers, trade items, do quests, and stuff like that? That just seems like a no-brainer to me. Plus, everything else that they're doing, every other franchise that they have would make a lot of sense in mobile as well. Mario Kart Tour is a good example of a good one, but again, I don't know that that's performing to the level of Pokemon Go. So, and even having an AR race, kind of like Live Circuit, how that works, but putting it where you could race around your neighborhood through Google Maps or something. Niantic would have to come up with that. I don't know how that technology would work. But I just feel like Niantic and Nintendo is a smart partnership. I feel like that would be one where both would get a lot out of it. Nintendo more so. But I feel like the way that they've worked together for so long, this is one of those things like Next Level or Monolith, where eventually Nintendo has partnered with them for so long that they just absorb them and they become part of Nintendo as a first-party developer in-house. So I would not be surprised if Niantic became that. And finally, we get to Square Enix. Now, I said I was going to mention these folks, and honestly, this entry is where the idea for the entire segment came up. Now, when I say Square Enix, a lot will say PlayStation, Sony. And you're right. Square Enix has a lot of franchises that are either PlayStation exclusives or will be or are associated with PlayStation. Your Final Fantasies, your Dragon Quests, your Kingdom Hearts, your Forspoken is an upcoming exclusive. Final Fantasy 16 is going to be exclusive. Final Fantasy 7 Remake is exclusive. So thinking that Square Enix being bought by Sony is logical is indeed logical. That does make a lot of sense. But I have a different idea, and this is one that I just hinted at, and you didn't know it. I think Square Enix would fit in right at home under Mickey Mouse's umbrella. That's right. I am proposing here on episode 84 of Cheese Sticks and Controllers that Square Enix's suitor should be Disney. And I say this a week after I was in Disney World. And I'm walking around Disney World and I'm seeing the worlds of Star Wars in Hollywood Studios and Avatar in Animal Kingdom. And I'm thinking to myself, as I've thought for many years, in recent years that I've gone to Disney World, they have a major popular franchise in Kingdom Hearts that has little to no representation in those parks. And that's because Square Enix technically owns the franchise and Disney owns the characters. Now, those characters do exist. There is a costume of Sora and Goofy and Donald floating around out there somewhere from Kingdom Hearts. I've seen them in wedding photos for a gentleman who used to work, or who works for Nintendo now, but used to work for Disney Interactive, by the name of John Vignacci. I don't know how he says it. I'm sorry if I butchered it and you're listening to this. But I know that they're out there, but that's it. There's no, at least not in Orlando, there's no Kingdom Hearts representation whatsoever, and I find that to be very silly. And then I thought about it a little more, and I thought to myself, well, if they were to just buy Square Enix outright, they could have a whole section of one of their parks. Like, they could turn Japan in Epcot. It's cool now. It's my favorite place at Epcot. But they could turn that into, or at least half of it, into a full Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts. Imagine if they turned Japan in Epcot into Traverse Town or Midgar or a combination of the two. Imagine going to the Magic Kingdom fireworks and hearing Simple and Clean, just like you did when he was revealed for Super Smash Bros. That instrumental, Hikari, Simple and Clean, whatever you want to call it. Imagine that. I got goosebumps just thinking about it, and it wasn't coming as I was watching the fireworks last week. Their partnership is there, still making Kingdom Hearts games. I don't know if the future of Kingdom Hearts was going to be very Disney heavy, but being purchased by Disney and being brought in under the Disney umbrella, I think would give them a lot more freedom to a point. Both the Disney side in using those properties and the Square Enix side in being able to use other Disney franchises in their games. If Square Enix is purchased by Disney, they now have access to Star Wars and Marvel and Kingdom Hearts. Or in other games, other franchises. That to me is an exciting proposition. Maybe I have a little biased here. Maybe my enjoyment of Disney and my enjoyment of Square Enix is clouding my judgment. But something about this partnership and what it could do on a game level, what it could do on a multimedia level, what it could do on a parks level, which makes a lot of sense to me. So if you're listening to this, Disney or Square Enix, and there's have been any talks of the mouse acquiring the cloud, let's say, it does make sense. And I think after the initial shock, people would see that. And maybe I just want to walk around with a plastic buster stored in Disney World, but that's neither here nor there. It just made sense to me. And it was the impetus for this entire segment. So if you agree with me, let me know on Twitter at BigManFinelli. If you don't agree with me, let me know at BigManFinelli on Twitter. Just be nice about it. That's all I ask. And I would love to know what mergers or acquisitions you think make the most sense in the current state of the video game industry. I am interested to hear what you have to say. Feel free, like I said, to reach out to me at BigManFinelli on Twitter. That's where I spend most of my social media time. And let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think the next big merger is going to be, and if you want to be a little saucy, when it's going to be. I'm curious to see when you think these things are going to happen. But coming up after the break, getting into our final segment of the evening, we're going to talk about Aloy and Horizon Forbidden West and why that game is so dang good, and you should buy it after you listen to this podcast today as it launches on February 18th. Stick around. All right, welcome back to Cheesesteaks and Controllers, episode number 84. We are here. Just got done talking about the Overwatch League and a couple of crazy mergers and acquisitions that I think make the most sense as far as the gaming industry is concerned. So let's take the last segment and talk about a game you're going to be able to play today if you're listening to this when the podcast launched, or as of yesterday if you're listening on the radio, or as of February 18th if you're listening to this episode a little late. And that is the sequel to one of 2017's best games and one of 2017's best PlayStation exclusives. Horizon Forbidden West is finally upon us. Aloy's next adventure takes her to the wild, wild west in a completely different way. This Wild West is instead full of giant machines that want to kill her, broken down Golden Gate bridges, and an absolutely crazy story. I just wanted to expand on my thoughts. I reviewed the game on MMORPG.com, and I've read all the other reviews that people have put up. I agree with a lot of the praise, and I do agree with a lot of the criticism as far as like technical things and some lore elements to it. Like there, for example, here's a PSA right off the bat in this discussion. One of my biggest pet peeves playing this game is that Aloy, when she's just walking around completing a quest, tends to talk as if she knows she's being watched. And what I mean by that is, like, there will be a ladder that you have to shoot with an arrow, a fully charged arrow, to drop it down. And she'll walk up to it and she'll say, just have to shoot this with an overcharged arrow and it'll work, or something like obvious like that. Those hints are annoying, they are unnatural, and they break the immersion of the game when you're trying to really get yourself into it. But I understand now that they are able to be turned off. So if you go into the hints accessibility portion and go to hints and turn them off, she will not ramble obvious solutions to herself, which is a huge boon, and I am very excited to hear that. So I'll have to go back in and do some post-game content without that and see how different my experience is. I don't think it's going to affect my overall score of 9.5 out of 10, but having the option there is pretty cool. My first impression of Horizon Forbidden West when I turned it on for the first time is, holy moly, this game is gorgeous. This is one of the most beautiful games I have ever played. The natural animations, the environments, the machines themselves have a certain type of dangerous beauty to them. The character models and the way they move and the way their faces animate. There are some moments where the faces look like they're staring off into space after saying something. But for the most part, this uncanny valley is something to behold. And it's an absolute technical marvel. Guerrilla should be absolutely thrilled with everything they were able to do to get this game on this console. And it looks absolutely flawless. I was playing the game. I started the game, the first mission, on their graphical fidelity setting. There's two different settings. There's fidelity and performance. Fidelity is 4K at 30 frames a second. And it is drop dead gorgeous. Absolutely unreal, the level of detail that was added to these environments. However, dropping the fighting to 30 frames per second, especially when the cutscenes then come back up to a better frame rate, is annoying. And honestly is not the best use of your time. I highly recommend for this game on PlayStation 5 that you play in performance mode. 1080p, yes, you lose the 4K, but that crisp and smooth 60 frames a second is unlike anything you will play again this year, I am willing to bet. It is so smooth. It is so good. It feels so good in your hands, the way she's jumping around or she's shooting arrows or aiming and all that stuff. It's just, the action is better 60 frames a second. It just is. And so I can deal with a lack of detail in a game which is still gorgeous. Don't get me wrong. It's not like the game loses much, if at all, for making this choice. But the 60 frames a second are more important than the graphical fidelity that you will get. So I would make that choice immediately. And speaking of the combat that is improved in 60 frames per second, boy, oh boy, is it just super cool. What I did appreciate between the last game and this one is that it seems to be more of a balance between ranged and melee combat. I thought the spear in the last game was sort of useless. I didn't really use it all that much. I preferred ranged stuff, whether it was the slingshot grenades, whose names elude me at the moment, or the bows and arrows and stuff like that. And there are better melee weapons now, too, or ranged weapons now, too, excuse me. One ranged weapon in particular I used for basically the entire second half of the game, and I'll get into that in a second. But the spear itself has a pretty neat mechanic in it called Resonator. And as you attack with the spear, normal attacks, you build energy, build energy, build energy. And then if you use a heavy attack with your spear, you can transfer that energy to your opponent. If you then hit that energy, it'll be marked on their body somewhere, either on a limb or on their chest or wherever. If you hit that spot with an arrow, the energy explodes and creates massive damage on that enemy. Very, very cool mechanic. Very, very strategic in action. I thought that was a nice way to balance the combat, to get people to want to use the spear, even when the last games was not very good. But the ranged combat still wins. There's a level of satisfaction from taking an arrow and knocking a component off of a giant metal beast that the melee combat just does not reach, or cannot compare to. In particular, there is a new ranged weapon, as I mentioned earlier, called the Bolt Blaster, which is essentially a semi-automatic crossbow. So you can charge it, and then when you unleash it, it shoots, I think, 8 bolts, maybe 6 bolts at a time at most. And you have to charge it again to get the next 6, and eventually you have to reload. I think it holds 60, so you get 10 rounds total, or 10 shots total. 48 in the chamber, 12 in the background, or 12 and 40. I don't remember exactly how that works off the top of my head. But this weapon is awesome. And I found one. I bought one from a merchant that was a very rare. It was a purple. And it had plasma energy and frost energy and lightning energy bolts. So I had choices based on weaknesses of the enemies that I was taking on. And I just laid waste to people with this thing. It was so neat. Loved, especially with the slowdown from concentration, and you charge it up and you feel in the controller the weapon tightening in your hands thanks to the dual sense haptics. Then you let go of the button and you feel the jolts. It's so awesome. Bolt Blaster is such a cool weapon. I absolutely dug it from in this new game, and I highly recommend that you follow the Bolt Blaster trail and get yourself a good one, at least for your first playthrough. If eventually if you're going to play it again and you want to experiment, fine. But Bolt Blaster is necessary in one of those slots to get you through this game. Moving on from that, let's talk about the story. I thought Horizon Zero Dawn was one of the best stories in recent memory. I thought the way that it, looked like it was going to be one thing and then it took a turn and never really let you go was awesome. I thought the origins of the term Zero Dawn were amazing and creative and thinking outside the box sort of stuff. Literally dropping my jaw as it was happening the first time I played it. I was hoping that this story would be just as good. And in retrospect, as I think about it now, sitting here reflecting on it about a little less than a week since I've rolled credits, I think at best I could say it's on par. I feel like there were some moments where I was like, oh man, I can't believe this is happening. But there were others where I'm like, yeah, I can see this coming a mile away, and then it came to fruition. The one aspect of the game in particular that I find to be the most interesting has to do with the woman in the trailer, one of the most recent trailers with the white hair. Her name is Tilda. Again, I'm not going to get into spoilers. I'm not going to get into things of that nature. I don't want to spoil this experience for anybody. I would hate to do that because I would hate for it to happen to me. But Tilda is an interesting twist that even when I was trying to predict where this story would go, I didn't see coming. I didn't expect this approach to be what they decided to do in Forbidden West. And then there are added layers to that approach, like failures where you thought were victories and answers to what's going on with this person and why they are in the game to begin with. Just a lot of interesting questions. And like a true second game, I will say that the ending absolutely sets up a third game. That's all I'm going to say about the ending. Like I said, we'll do a spoiler deep dive a couple episodes from now, maybe 87 or 86. I don't want to ruin it for folks. But holy moly, does this story set up a third game. Or maybe a DLC. I don't... It could be a massive DLC expansion along the lines of the Dawn of Ragnarok for AC Valhalla, where it's adding, multiple hours of content. But I really do think that the way that the table was set, that they're planning for a third meal. If you catch the allegory, if you catch the metaphor. But loved the story, loved the characters. I will say this about the game. I'm not going to get into too specifics, but there was an element of Mass Effect 2 in this game that I did not expect. Like, I was doing my main quest tasks and I was going to places and helping people, all things that Aloy did in the first game. But what didn't happen is the people that she was helping or the friends that she was making would join her. And I could talk to them, and I could do quests for them. And in doing quests for them, they became more formidable in battle and stuff like that. That, I thought, was a very cool twist. And also making it so that these companions, when you find them in your place, have conversations that continue throughout the game. Like, if you go after one quest, they'll say one thing. After you go to the next quest, they'll say another thing, maybe about one of the people that are staying there or someone who just came in or something like that. Just a really cool, interesting, heart-to-heart sort of interaction with the members of my party. Now, I don't go into the adventures with them. There are certain missions where you will, certain side quests where you'll do something for someone and they'll come with you or something of that nature. But the companion aspect and having people to see how they're reacting to these things and to catch up and stuff like that, was really cool. I thought that was a really neat little way to expand the horizon of characters in this game without having to go with a full-on, second playable character or party of people that you're playing with at the same time. Whenever the graphics, they're gorgeous. Whenever the gameplay, whenever the story, the music is wonderful, as is to be expected. Soundtrack is absolutely killer. I love that it goes halfway with the majestic, lady singing music that you're used to in the main theme. But then also gets a little futuristic when the game gets futuristic, because this is a sci-fi after all. And the music applies in kind, which I thought was also a nice touch for the game. But a couple of technical issues, like every once in a while I would do something and the screen would just go black and then come right back again, which didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Also, there were times where I would be at a quest marker and there would be no indication as to what I would have to do, or someone that I was following would run in a circle, or even at one point, the NPC I was trying to help did not even get into the stance where I could hand her the items that I had received for her, forcing me, it was a companion, so it forced me to wait until I got back to my meeting place, talk to her there, and then I could give it to her, which I thought was a little frustrating. But I do think that those technical issues can be fixed, and I do think, or at the very least, they can be ignored, because the game is incredible. The game, you can get absolutely lost in it for hours on end. You could lose sleep over it if you choose to. It's a game that, if you allowed it to, would take up a lot of your time as far as gaming or anything in general is concerned. And it's worth every great review it has gotten so far. If you have a PlayStation 5, if you have a PlayStation 4, put this on your list. Play it as soon as possible. I gave it a 9.5 out of 10 at MMORPG, but if I had to give it a thumbs up or thumbs down, I highly, highly, highly recommend Horizon Forbidden West. And with that, we are at the end of episode number 84 of the Cheesesteaks and Controllers podcast. I thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, coming back after a vacation. Love talking about Overwatch League and how they're finally starting. Love talking about the mergers and acquisitions that I think are going to come up, that could possibly come up in the near future. And then I love talking about Horizon Forbidden West. I could do it for hours because the game is just absolutely great. But this is the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I appreciate it, especially if you've gotten this far and you're still hearing my voice in your ears. Thank you for your support of this show and of me. It is something that I am very grateful for, and I hope I can continue to share with you my thoughts on all things gaming and esports via Cheesesteaks and Controllers in the near future. So with that, I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you have a great week right behind it. Short week for most folks, and we will be back again next week with more from the latest and greatest in video games and esports. Thank you so much for listening. Go Sonics. Goodbye.